على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعوهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد. Alhamdulillah, it's been, as with many things, over a year since the last time I sat here on a Monday night. Those who remember, we used to have an ongoing program on Monday nights from the book Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin, which is the abridgment of the methodology of the desirous ones, those desirous of the spiritual path. In consultation with our Imam, Hafidhahullah, may Allah preserve him, we're transitioning the Monday night program to focus on Dawah, since that is the capacity that I work with ICI in predominantly. So we're going to be discussing Dawah and all the different things that are related to Dawah. So inevitably we will wind up talking about some of the same things we talked about before, but we're also going to be talking about other things related to the specifics relating to Dawah. So hopefully this will serve as an encouragement and a preparation process for those who might be interested in being involved in sharing the message of Islam with others, whether within our community or outside of our community, inshallah. So just as an introduction, many of you may or may not know me all that very well. So my name is Saeed Purcell. I am a convert, as you may have already guessed. I've been very fortunate to be Muslim for over 28 years now, and I've been teaching Islamic studies to pretty much every demographic for over 25 years, and have been involved and am currently still involved with multiple Dawah projects all over the country. Primary one, of course, being right here at ICI. Dawah is the area that we're talking about, and it's something I've been very blessed to be involved in some capacity for a very long time. When we talk about Dawah, and as I said, this is going to be an ongoing conversation, and we're going to be covering a lot of different territories. Some of it will be very specific about Dawah. Some of it will be a little bit more general about the deen itself as we talk about different aspects of the Dawah. So when we talk about a subject, and we've had this conversation many times before, whenever we talk about a subject, we always try to define the subject at the start. So in general, the term Dawah is more accurately Da'wata ilallah, calling to Allah. That is the fullness of the term, of the expression. When we say Dawah, what we're referring to is Da'wata ilallah. It's calling to Allah, because that should be the crux of our Dawah. Our Dawah should be not to our organization, not to ourselves, not to our group, not to our party, not to our culture, not to any of these things, but it should be first and foremost always to Allah. That should be our focus. So Dawah to Allah. The term itself, Dawah, is from da'a, which is to call, similar to that. And Allah talks about how He calls us in many different places and the response that He receives, positive and negative, in the Quran and the consequences thereof. In terms of Dawah itself, and if I had a whiteboard, I could do this more effectively, but I'm going to be using one particular reference more often than any other, which is one of my teachers, Dr. Abu Amina Bilal Phillips, Hafidhahullah, may Allah preserve him, who himself is a convert of, Lord, now it's bordering on 50 years, and he has been teaching in the Khalij, in the Middle East, for decades. A graduate of Medina and a PhD in Usul al-Din, and an extensive publisher in the English language. Many of the earliest books in the English language when it came to Islamic topics were written by him, because none existed. And he was trying to educate people about Islam in the Middle East, and he was looking for material. Because none existed, he had to go ahead and create it himself. So this is based on a program that he's taught many times. Originally, the program itself was a 9-day program, 9 full days in the Qatar Guest Center in Qatar. But he's evolved it and transformed it and everything else, etc. But so the first thing after defining the topic itself, the term itself, dawah, and the call that we're calling to Allah, he has, and again, if I had a whiteboard, it'd be easier to do this. He has some interesting acronyms and formulas that he uses to drive home the points. So when you talk about dawah, the way he expresses this is, if we assume dawah as the term D equals C1 plus C2 plus C3. Now that makes absolutely no sense, I'm sure. Made no sense to us when we first heard it. But what he's referring to is this. He's saying that dawah, D, equals C1 plus C2 plus C3. C1 is the call, what you're calling to. C2 is the caller, the one who's doing the calling. And C3 is the called, the one you're calling. And that these three components are considered the pillars, the arkan of dawah. You have the call, the caller, and the called. Each three has its own considerations and its own imports. And so each of these is critical to address and to look into and read. And we will do that, inshallah, to a certain extent. We won't spend too much time on the call because that's essentially the deen in its entirety. And needless to say, that would take up a lot of space. When it comes to the caller, we will probably spend a fair amount of time on that because that relates to the topic we used to talk about before in terms of traveling a spiritual path, because it's about perfecting ourselves, our characters, our manners, the qualities that make us successful in this life and in the next, inshallah ta'ala. The last one being the called, the person that you're calling. This is where eventually what we will do is we will start to get into specifics around situations you run into with different groups, like Christians, Jews, atheists, agnostics, etc., and get into even some of those common questions that you get or the common pushback that you get and possible ways to respond to them. So this, as I said, this will be ongoing, and the information we'll provide, it will take a while to get there, inshallah, but you'll have a lot of information wherewith you should be well armed to go ahead and talk to people and be able to respond to them when things come up. So just spending a little bit of time, I want to stick with these acronyms and these formulas that Dr. Bilal uses. So C1 is the call. The first principle, the first pillar is the call. Now in terms of the call, we know, and we alluded to it when we mentioned that it's da'wah to ilallah, it's calling to Allah. In terms of the call, C1, to use Dr. Bilal's terminology, and inshallah I'll find some way to have a whiteboard or something next time because it makes it a little easier. C1 equals U2 in Dr. Bilal's shorthand. Again, makes no sense when you first hear it or if you picture it in your mind on a board. What he means by C1 equals U2 is this. C1 we established is the call, our dawah, if you will. U2, or U squared, is the way he represents the term tawheed. Now, tawheed usually we heard described as oneness. Strictly speaking, the concept isn't oneness because he's famous for commenting in many of his lectures when you talk about like Kul huwallahu ahad. Even though many times that's translated, say Allah is one, strictly speaking, that's not accurate. Saying Allah is one or that something is one is not very specific. In other words, I could say this misbaha is one. There's one misbaha in my hand. But that does not preclude the fact that there might be a misbaha in your hand, or in your hand, or in yours. It's not the only one. It's not unique. It's one of potentially many. So when you say simply Allah is one, you open yourself up for the possibility of people saying, but there's another one. But when you say ahad, ahad is more specific. Ahad is like saying, I have this sibaha in my hand and this is the only one. It's unique. It stands alone. There is no other. So when you say Allah is ahad, He's one and unique. And so you two, you squared, is the way He expresses it, saying unique unity. Allah is one. He's not divisible, but He's also unique. There is nothing like unto, as the surah concludes with, la kufuwan lahu ahad, that nothing is similar or comparable to Him. So unique unity, and so unique unity, you two. He has the next layer of his explanation. This is just giving a quick summary of the way he explains the call. We talked about dawah to ilallah, calling to Allah. So when you call to Allah, you're calling to what? You're calling to Tawheed. You two, unique unity. How does he define unique unity? Tawheed. So the next formula he would put on the board would be you two equals L-A-W. Again, makes no sense initially. You two, unique unity, which we established as how he's defining or explaining for us Tawheed, equals L-A-W. Lordship, attributes, worship. The three categories of Tawheed, when you get into the study of Tawheed in a more formal setting, you're told about the three categories of Tawheed. Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, lordship. Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, or Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat, the attributes. And Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, or Tawheed al-Ubudiyyah, worship. L-A-W. Simple way to remember these things for people that are just starting out. Because many of us, we need little assistances to be able to do things like this, etc. So this is the way he explains it. And you get into the concept of the conversation, the talk, the call. Again, the call should be specifically to Tawheed. And actually, if you think about the instance where the Prophet ﷺ sent Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiallahu an to Yemen, his instruction to him was to call to Allah. And then, in fact, in one narration of that, he uses the same term as forms the root of Tawheed. Wahdahu is to teach them that He is one, that He is unique. That is the first thing, the first mission He has when He is sent to these people in Yemen, who are predominantly people of the book. That the first thing you do is you teach them Tawheed. And then if they accept that, so it's in stages, it's not all at once, but it's in stages. If they accept that, then you teach them about the 5 prayers. The 5 prayers. And if they accept that from you, then you teach them about zakat. But it's interestingly, he says, this to give you an example of how the attributes of the caller are important, because he said, but don't take the best of their property. When you teach them about zakat, when you teach them about this obligation, this financial obligation, part of the advice in the narration itself is to say, but don't take the best of their property. In other words, when you're taking the obligation they owe, you don't take the best of what they have to offer. You leave them the best and you take the middle quality. You don't take the worst, because that's beneath the one that's receiving it. And you don't take the best because that's harmful to the one that's giving it. You take the moderate quality, moderate quantity, so as to be easy on all concerned. So even the manners in this one simple example are already being shown in that. And he said, and if they accept that, then their situation is with Allah, and then you just carry on with it like that. But so stages and categories, but starting with Tawheed of Allah, belief in Allah. And we'll talk a little more in coming weeks about different aspects of this. Like I said, we won't dwell too much on this because this is this is in and of itself a huge topic and a deep topic that could go on forever. But we'll probably spend more of our energy on the caller, because that was related to what we were doing in the past, and specifically how it relates to the Dawah, and then we will start to talk about specific situations. If you have questions or situations that come to mind that you want to, get a perspective on. I'm not saying the answer, because what you'll find when you look at Dawah as a subject of study, many people have different approaches to Dawah. The general principles of Dawah are pretty straightforward, but the specific methodology that people use, it varies widely. And we'll get into some of that and some of the various theories. I know my own personal approach is a little unique. So we'll touch upon some of that, and we'll get into that, etc. But we'll talk, and we'll get very specific. And as always, it's been a long time, so I'll just reiterate it. Feel free to bring up questions, to pose things for questions or comment, etc. We learn from each other. We're all equal. We're all equal. Just because I'm sitting here doesn't mean anything. It just means that I was the one who they chose to pick on. So, inshallah, we all learn from one another, inshallah. So next week, inshallah, we'll probably spend a little more time on the call. We might do that 1 or 2 more times before we transition into the caller. And then eventually we'll get to the called, and we'll really start to dig into specifics about situational matters that you're dealing with in talking to people. General at first, and then specific to different groups, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka